Alberta has ghost towns that most Albertans have never heard of, sitting inside national parks, along abandoned rail lines, and at the top of mountain roads that barely exist anymore. Some of them ended in disaster. Some were dismantled and hauled off piece by piece, and a few just quietly emptied out when the coal gave up. Here are 8 of them, counting down to a place where the streets are still intact, about 100 feet underwater. Number 8. Bankhead. There was a town on the slopes of Cascade Mountain, inside what is now Banff National Park, that was bigger and better equipped than Banff itself. Bankhead went up in 1903 around a mine owned by the Canadian Pacific Railway, and at its height, about 1,000 people lived there, with electric light, running water, a sewer system, and street lamps at a time when neither Banff nor Canmore had any of it. The problem was the coal. It was anthracite, and it was so brittle that it began breaking apart the moment it hit the air, and a huge share of what came out of the mountain was effectively powder. To sell it at all, the company had to blend it with pitch and press it into briquettes, which was expensive, and through the 1910s, the labor disputes kept coming. In April of 1922, the miners walked out, and the railway responded by closing the mine for good that June. Then came the part that makes Bankhead unusual. The town wasn't left to fall down, it was taken apart. Houses were lifted off their foundations and hauled away to Banff, to Canmore, to Calgary. The church, by local accounts, was cut in half and carted off. And when the National Parks Act banned mining inside the park in 1930, there was no possibility of anyone ever coming back. Foundations, slag, and a walking trail are what's left. Number 7. Wayne. Getting to Wayne means crossing 11 single-lane bridges in about 6 kilometers, back and forth over the Rosebud River through the Badlands southeast of Drumheller. The road was built that way for coal traffic. Wayne grew up around the Rose Deer mine, which opened around 1912, and estimates of its peak run anywhere from 1,500 to 3,000 people. It had 2 schools, a hospital, stores, and a hotel, and it had a saloon that the miners called the Bucket of Blood on account of how the evenings there tended to finish. Then, the Depression hit the Drumheller coal field. The first mines started closing in the early 1930s, and the population drained out of the valley. Fewer than 30 people live in Wayne today. The Rose Deer Hotel and the Last Chance Saloon are both still open, which means you can still buy a drink in a building that has outlived the town around it by about 90 years. Number 6. Mountain Park. At 6,200 feet, this was the highest year-round community in the entire British Commonwealth. It sat at the far end of the coal branch, the rail line that opened up country which had been unreachable before the track went in, and it existed to feed steam coal to the locomotives. Around 1,500 people lived up there at its peak, with a school, a hospital, a library, a butcher shop, and a hockey rink, all of it perched in the mountains at an altitude where winter is a serious proposition. What ended Mountain Park was a combination of things arriving at once: mounting debt, a coal market that was collapsing as the railways looked at diesel, and finally the McLeod River flooding and washing out the rail bed that the whole town depended on. It closed in 1950. Almost nothing of the town remains. What does remain, restored and maintained on the hillside above the empty town site, is the highest cemetery in Canada, still looking down on the place where all those people used to live. Number 5. Lille. This one began as a French project, and it ended as a set of Belgian ruins in the woods. In 1901, 2 representatives of a French mining company came into the Crowsnest Pass looking for coal, founded up the Gold Creek Valley, and started a camp that everyone initially just called French Camp. It was renamed Lille after the city in France where the money had come from, and what they put up was ambitious for somewhere that remote. Around 80 buildings, a 15-bed hospital, a 4-room school, a police station. To turn the coal into coke, the company ordered 50 Bernard coke ovens from Belgium, which arrived as individual bricks, every single one of them numbered, so the whole thing could be reassembled correctly on the other side of the Atlantic. It worked for about a decade. Then coal prices dropped, costs climbed, The ash content in the coal got worse, and in 1912, the mines shut. The buildings were dismantled and moved elsewhere in the pass. By 1916, nobody lived there at all, and the village was formally dissolved in 1919. The coke ovens are still standing in the trees, brick by numbered brick, along with a fire hydrant marking a street corner that no longer exists. Number 4. Nordegg. A German entrepreneur named Martin Nordegg staked coal claims in the foothills in 1907, brought in German, Belgian, and British money, went into partnership with the Canadian Northern Railway, and then did something unusual. Instead of throwing up the standard grid of company housing, he had the town laid out as a wheel, with the streets radiating out from the center like spokes, modeled on the Garden City ideas coming out of England at the time. It worked, and by the early 1940s, around 2,500 people lived there. On the 31st of October 1941, an explosion tore through the number 3 mine. 29 men were killed, and the inquest found that what killed most of them wasn't the blast itself, but the carbon monoxide that flooded the workings afterward, the gas miners knew as afterdamp. The mine kept going until 1955, when the railways finished converting to diesel and the market for steam coal simply evaporated. What happened next is the odd part. From 1963 until 1995, the old town site was used as a minimum security prison camp. It became a National Historic Site in 2001. Number 3. Anthracite. Before Bankhead, there was Anthracite, a town that stood roughly 7 kilometers northeast of Banff at the base of the same mountain, founded in 1886 and now buried under a highway. About 300 people lived there, most of them American miners brought up from the eastern United States, and it had a general store, a hotel, a pool hall, and a local reputation for brothels and for drinking that ignored whatever the law happened to be that year. The mine had 2 problems it could never solve. The coal crumbled, and the seams ran down below the water table, so the workings flooded again and again. After one flood too many, the owner gave up on the site entirely and moved his operation to Canmore. Anthracite was essentially deserted by 1904, and the 1911 census counted 25 people. The Trans-Canada Highway now runs directly through where the town stood. And there is one more thing. In 1997, the last living resident told a Banff newspaper about a rumor he had heard decades earlier, that a child had drowned in the Cascade River in the late 1800s and been buried somewhere in the town site. The government looked into it, concluded there probably was an unmarked grave, and put up a plaque. Number 2. Frank. At 10 minutes past 4 in the morning on the 29th of April, 1903, the east face of Turtle Mountain came off. Around 44 million cubic meters of limestone slid down onto the valley floor and buried 3 square kilometers of it, in places to a depth of 45 meters. The whole thing took roughly 100 seconds. It buried the eastern edge of town, the rail line, and the mine entrance. And somewhere between 70 and 90 people died, and the exact number has never been settled because only a fraction of the bodies were ever recovered. Most are still under the rock, in what remains the deadliest landslide in Canadian history. The Blackfoot and the Kootenai had a name for Turtle Mountain that translates as the mountain that moves, and they would not camp at the foot of it. Frank did not die that morning. The railway was repaired inside 3 weeks and the mine reopened. What finished the original town site was a royal commission in 1911, which examined the North Peak, declared it unstable, and concluded the town was still in danger. The government ordered Old Frank moved. Buildings were dismantled and relocated, some across the tracks, some to other towns in the pass, and the Imperial Hotel was hauled the whole way to Vulcan. Today, the highway runs across the rubble field, over the top of everyone still down there. And number 1, Minnewanka Landing. In the 1880s, a log hotel called the Beach House opened on the shore of a lake northeast of Banff, and a summer resort grew up around it. By the early 1900s, Minnewanka Landing was a proper village. Hotels, restaurants, rows of rental cottages, Wharves out into the water, and cruise boats called the Lady of the Lake and the Daughter of the Peaks, carrying visitors up and down a lake that runs nearly 30 kilometers through the mountains. Then, in 1941, in the middle of the Second World War, a new dam was approved to generate power for Banff and Calgary, authorized under the War Measures Act, which overrode the National Parks Act that would otherwise have protected the site. The dam raised the water level by 30 meters. The village went under, along with an earlier dam and a bridge, and nobody has walked those streets since. But here's what makes Minnewanka Landing different from every other drowned town. The lake is glacier-fed and sits at around 2 degrees Celsius year-round, which means almost nothing down there is rotted. The building foundations are intact, so are the wharves, the sidewalks, a chimney, an oven, a cellar. Divers go down and swim along streets that people walked a century ago, past the front steps of hotels, in water cold enough to have stopped time. It is one of the most intact submerged villages in Canada, and every summer thousands of people take boat tours directly over the top of it without knowing it's down there. If you know an abandoned town that deserves a spot on the next list, leave it in the comments. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.